Good evening. We'll be getting started in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 after the hour. This is a perfect time for you to go grab something to drink, get comfortable as we settle in for the night. 5 minutes after the hour. We'll be getting started in 3 minutes. We'll be getting started in 2 minutes. Good evening and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Quincia, and I will be your host this evening as we delve into a pretty interesting topic, I think. I first want to welcome everybody that is domestic to North America, as well as those coming in from the Philippines and around the world. Thank you for giving time out of your very busy lives to be with us for the next hour and a half. I have in studio with me brothers Patrick Alessandra and Benjamin Hartle, and they are the moderators of the various platforms on which we are streaming on. So thank you to them as they come in every month and hang out with me for an hour and a half during the Masonic Seminar Series, which the Masonic Seminar Series was created to help provide more information for those who are interested in Freemasonry. They feel called, but they don't quite know what Freemasonry is about, or they just want more information and they already are a Mason and they'd like to delve deeper into the various Mason. We are here for almost 10 years. It's been, I think, 8, and we are very happy to be here. We are one of two our universal co-masonry for men and women. The other one is our Masonic philosophical. Familiar with that platform, I highly recommend it. It is more based. They bring up topics that are related to Freemasonry and then they kick around ideas and discuss whatever that topic is. Here at the Masonic Seminar Series, we're a little different. It is a lecture-based series, so you get to listen to me for the next hour and a half, lucky you, and I will give you presentations based off of my studies of Freemasonry over the past 20 years. And for those who are constantly joining me, thank you. I try very hard to make sure the topics are different every time I present on the same topic, just to keep it fresh and to keep it real, because education is ongoing. I don't want to ever present the same thing twice because that means I'm not not learning in that aspect. So for those who are joining us for the first time, the Masonic Seminar Series is an anthology. It is every month a different topic. It is not predicated on the previous topics. So if you did not join us for session 1, no worry. Session 2 is a standalone, as are all the other sessions. All right. That is our introduction. I'd like to jump into our topic today, and I have to apologize up front because I pulled a fast one on you. I have changed the topic from what I told you it was going to be, and I want to tell you why. For those who don't know me, I like to really sit with something for a long time and make sure it is the right thing to present. And as I sat with the difference between knowing and becoming, I really didn't feel like that was something that we need to address tonight. And so at the last minute, I changed the presentation. And so I put that one up on the digital archive shelf and giving you a different one. Tonight, we are going to go for a literary perspective, and we're going to look at one of 3 books of Dante's Divine Comedy. I feel like this is the topic that we need to address. I'm also going to change the perspective that we're going to take. Typically, we like to focus on the individual. This time we are not. So hopefully you will find something out of today's presentation that you will really, really enjoy. Before we delve into Dante's Inferno, I do want to say we got some feedback from the past several seminars, and we'd like to implement a little change. So what we're going to do, because I typically will stop for questions once or twice throughout a presentation, and in order to help streamline those questions, and in order to get through all the content that we have available for you tonight, we are going to ask you that if you have questions, that you put them in the chat. So for those who are coming in on Zoom, Brother Benjamin Hartle will be the one that will be overseeing and moderating those questions. He will streamline them, compile them, and then when the time is ready, when the questions are open, he will ask on the behalf of all those who are asking that particular question. The same is true for those who are coming on X, Facebook, and YouTube. Brother Patrick Alessandra will be moderating those platforms, so you can throw your questions in at any time, and he will be your voice for those that are coming in on, again, YouTube, Facebook, and X. That way we can make sure all the questions are covered and they're on point, and I can get through all the content that we have prepared. And I do want to say thank you for everyone who sends me emails with thoughts and ideas and shares feedback and all of that. I am always listening, and we're always looking for ways to make our presentations better. All right, with that being said, and I will give you a heads up, especially if Brother Patrick reminds me, that I will let you know if I'm going to stop for questions like in advance, so that way you can get them ready and put them in the chat and whatnot. All right, let's get to our surprise presentation. So we are going to, as I said, talk about Dante's Inferno. I read this book many, many years ago, and it is a fabulous, fabulous book. Now, it has taken me since then, time to really digest it and grok it and come to know it. And I presented it on, different ways at NPS and whatnot, which again is the Masonic Philosophical Society. For those who are like, oh man, I've already heard you do Dante's Inferno. You have not. I have done a different perspective on this one. Typically, what I like to do when I present Dante's Inferno and Freemasonry is I like to, talk about the symbolism, especially like the dark woods, or in this image here is the gate of hell, and talk about what the symbolism means, because Masons are really, really big on processing and understanding symbols and trying to pull out what those symbols mean. I will look at symbols. I will also look at imagery. I will talk about everything but the nine circles of hell because typically people are like, oh yeah, that's gluttony. I'm familiar with what gluttony is, or wrath, or lust, and that's pretty, mundane. But tonight we are going to focus on those nine circles of hell. And if I say gate of hell is my constant, I trip on gate and circle, but I always mean circle. So if you hear me say gates of hell, I mean circle of hell. Um, So when we look at the nine circles of hell, we're going to look at them not necessarily in any deep sense because we don't have time. And I could present a whole course on Dante's Inferno and Freemasonry over a series of days. So we're not going to go really, really deep. We are going to go much more broad, and we're going to look at the various nine circles of hell. But I want to give you a framework of what I mean by that. So Dante, he was deeply influenced by Aristotle, especially his Nicomachean ethics, and as well as Aquinas. He was very Christian, and yet he had a deep philosophical uh, vein within him. So, if you're not familiar with Dante's Inferno, it is a Christian's perspective, but I'm not going to take that. I'm going to take it's kind of hard not to because he is Christian and there's a lot of Christian parts to it, but it's not from, it's going to come from a Masonic perspective. So keep that in mind. When we look at what Dante was trying to do, he was trying to use himself. He's the main character in his books, which is the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And Paradiso and Purgatorio, we're not going to talk about those, but that's the intermediate, and then obviously heaven, if you will. When he looks at this, he's the avatar, and he represents all of us. I'm going to take this back a few magnifications, take away from that personal scrutiny where we're so close and up inside our souls to, look at what's wrong with us and how we can fix it. I want to actually pull back that magnification. I want to look at society. So when we are talking about Dante and going through the dark woods, coming upon the three ruffians, trying to ascend the mountain but can't because three ruffians are blocking his way, forcing him down into the nine circles of hell. I wanted to take that from a perspective of humanity. That's where we're going to sit with this in our perspective for the next hour and a half. And of course, you are at liberty to take this as a personal, venture as you want. But for now, suspend that for the next hour and a half. Because the one thing that Masonry is very concerned with, that we spend a lot of time contemplating and studying, is humanity. So tonight, Dante is going to represent humanity instead of the individual. And it's kind of nice, I would have to say. Our society is so hyper individualized that it's kind of nice to not think about oneself all the time and maybe think about the collective of souls that exist across the world. The statement I'm about to make is not one that is just specific to those who are domestic in North America, but is one that is indigenous to all societies in the present moment. Modernity has found its societies very sick. Currently, people are very, very unhappy, again, across all civilizations, not just one or a select few, but across all of them. And my hope is tonight, as we go through this nine circles of hell, is not to be depressive and you walk away being like, that was the most depressing presentation. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? It is hopefully to give you a way to access your tool bags of virtues. And that tool bag has all those virtues in it. but to give you a practical way of using those tools. That's what masonry is about, right? We use tools, we wear aprons, we are all about work. If you're not willing to get dirty and messy and dig down into the work, the masonry may not be the thing for you because we are all about labor. Labor is the lot of man. The heart may be, the heart may conceive and the brain devise in vain if the hand be not prompt to execute the design. We are absolutely about labor. So my goal is tonight is to give you a way to use the tools of virtue to help lift the communities that you are in touch with, that you are a part of, and that we can slowly, if not speedily, help this great malaise that has fallen all over the societies of humanity. So when we look at Freemasonry, it is an initiatic system that uses myth, legend, and drama. So we are trying to, in Masonry, and this is a very general and broad statement, but we are trying to create what Plato would call philosopher kings. We call them custodians, in the sense that we're trying to create people who are morally and ethically rooted in right education on how to be custodians of humanity. Just like the people before us were our custodians, we are trying to be better than what they were, and hopefully we are, to help humanity get to where it's supposed to be. Masonry doesn't tell us like, oh, humanity is destined to leave, Earth and go to, explore the galaxy or the cosmos. And maybe that is. Humanity's destiny is unknown. But we are aware that humanity is destined for great things. Even right now, as we sit in our societies and we feel heavy with the burden of everything around us, we are destined for great things. And so Masonry not only holds the torch of optimism and hope and labor, but it also grounds itself so that it can help be what humanity needs us to be in whatever capacity that is. So looking at Dante's Inferno is a way for us to help understand what those problems are. It's kind of like a doctor, like trying to diagnose what's been going on so that we can be more effective. Oftentimes, when I'm studying with brothers in various degrees, one of the things I tell them, and it gets more specific depending on what degree you're in, but what I often tell them is sometimes we think we're called to do something. Like, oh, I'm going to be a great scientist, or I'm going to be a great author, or I'm going to be even a great parent. That's what I'm going to be. But if you sit back and you allow yourself to connect to the world around you and to connect to the cosmos, you may find that the universe has something very much indifferent in mind for you. The universe needs you to do something different, and we need to be open to that. And we need to be ready for that. We can't just sit there and be like, well, I'm going to be this really great scientist, so I'm going to put all my effort into that. Not that that's wrong, but I should be mindful that perhaps the universe needs me to be something else in addition to what I personally would like to be. So when we look at being custodians of humanity, we have to be very receptive and very much in line, in harmony with what is around us. And when I say around us, I'm talking about nature and the great architect, whether that be a creative force, first principle, or an actual anthropomorphical being. Doesn't matter. There are two parts to the motto of Universal Co-Masonry, which is to the glory of the great architect of the universe and to the perfecting of humanity. Now, this is not something that's specifically unique to us. You'll find that there are various Masonic obediences that either focus to the first, to the glory of the great architect, and they're very, either Christian or Jewish or whatever religious bend they tend to be. And then you have others that are going to just be for the perfecting of humanity. In France, with continental masonry, who focus on, civic reform. Universal Co-Masonry, and there are a few other obediences like us, we are bifurcated. We do both. We do both to the glory of the great architect of the universe and to the perfecting of humanity. So you can see why Dante's Inferno is really important, especially as a part of a later addition to the Western esoteric tradition, because it's so magnificent, his comedy. The one thing I want to say before we delve into it all is that the unique thing about Masonry, at least I found, is that typically you'll find philosophical systems or religious systems or lots of systems that teach through negation. And what I mean by negation is the negative. In religion, that would be called sin. In science, that would be called error, or, in other places, mistakes or wrongdoings. Masonry doesn't teach through negation, which I always was very surprised about, especially in my early years in Masonry, because you grow up hearing, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, to hear something different that's, thou shalt, it's something you should do, is a very different way of approaching education. And believe it or not, if you didn't know it, Masonry is very interested in your moral and spiritual education. So Freemasonry teaches an aphorism, teaches in the positive, thou shalt, thou shalt live a virtuous life. So much so that when you die, that you die regretted. And that people long to, they miss your company and they miss your wisdom. That you should, live a life of valorous conduct. It doesn't say what valorous conduct is, which is the crazy thing, because we're so used to, manuals on how to do stuff, step-by-step procedures that say this is how you live a valorous life. Masonry infers it, but you have to find it. And although Masonry doesn't teach with negation, it is inferred there are things that we shouldn't do. And again, you have to look for it, you have to study it, you have to be open to it. But if we are talking about virtue, then we must infer there's vice. And in order to live a virtuous life, we have to understand what it is to live a life of vice. So that's why it's really, really important that we look at how to inculcate and cultivate the virtues that exist. And virtue is not owned by Masonry, it's not owned by any religion, but it is something that is owned by humanity. And if there is virtue, there is vice. If there is becoming, there's unbecoming, and then so forth and so on. Before we pass over into I keep saying seven, the nine circles of hell, the one thing I want to say is that Freemasonry really, really strives to help bring out what is best in humanity. So, you know, people who are again feeling the weight of the society on them, like there are good things in this world. To quote Lord of the Rings, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Benjamin, there's a part where Samwise Gamgee is talking to Frodo. I think they're on this hillside of, is it Mordor, where he sits there and he looks up and he sees the sky, which had been cloudy. It opens up and he sees the stars and he says, look, Mr. Frodo, there is beauty beyond that he can't touch. Talking about Saruman. Talking about the Satan and the adversary in Lord of the Rings, that there is beauty that it can't be touched by the filth of the world. And that is something that's very, very true. That you live in a world where we get so inundated in things that are heavy and oppressive and repressive that we forget that there's still beauty all around us to be had. Now, when we look at the nine circles of hell, it's really interesting because my mind, because I like nice and orderly things, I'm like, okay, well, why nine? Like, why is it, why did Dante pick nine? That's not a nice round number. And it doesn't match seven, which, big in the cult circles is the number seven, because you have the four cardinal virtues of, temperance, justice, prudence, and toleration. Tolerance. There we go. There we go. It's not toleration, it's tolerance. Justice, prudence, fortitude, and tolerance. And those are the four.
Temperance.
Say 10.
You said tolerance. Temperance.
Tolerance, temperance. Let's try that again. Justice, fortitude, prudence, and temperance. All right. And then you have the three theological virtues, which is faith, hope, and charity, right? So when you put them together, that's a really good list of like, oh, this is how you should live your life according to these seven virtues. But Dante didn't take that and do like the seven deadly sins. He didn't take that and try to find the box and say, okay, that's hell. The magnificent, and there's a lot of magnificence of Dante's writing, is that he took Trinity, which is three, right? And he broke it apart and did 3 by 3 to get nine. He did an orderly dissemblement of what Pythagoras would have called harmony of the cosmos, musics of the spheres. Like he took it and he made it disorderly. And it's not necessarily based off of, it is a moral collapse. but it's more of a corruption and a perversion of reason. And reason is the key word. There are two phrases in Masonry that I hear often that I love. That reason, even in matters of faith, are essential. Like you can still be a faithful, to whatever spiritual religious tradition you believe in and still possess reason and be good at reason and be good at faith. Like you can have both. And in our society, we are very much put in positions where it's like we have to choose. Either we have to choose that it's all faith, and then it's called blind faith, or we can choose nothing but reason, and then, that just ends you up as a committee member of public safety committee, like you don't want that either. So you have to choose one or the other, and that's just a false dichotomy. That's not true. You can have both. The second phrase that I absolutely love is that faith steps in where reason falls exhausted. Again, showing us that there is a relationship between reason and faith. The guide for Dante, humanity, in Dante's Inferno is Virgil. Virgil was picked for many reasons in Dante's epic comedy because, one, he was a pagan. He was a Roman poet that lived before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. And again, Dante is very religious, so that was extremely important. He was also picked because he was a master at his craft and he possessed great reason. So Virgil is the guide for Dante, which is reason guiding Dante through the nine circles of hell, because reason is the only instrument that humans possess that allow you to identify problems and to try to find solutions. It doesn't mean it can fix it. Sometimes you can have all the great solutions in the world and it is not the right solution, but it allows you to process problems and to look at ways of solving those problems. So it's interesting because you have this play between Virgil, who is the epitome of reason, and then you have the construction of 3 by 3 of Dante's Hell, which is the collapse, the deconstruction, the corruption is the best word, the corruption of reason. And when we look at society, I'm sure you can point out many moments where you're like, that is a corruption of reason. When you're like, that's immoral, it's a corruption of reason. They both go together. So you're looking at how Dante has created the nine circles as an orderly collapse and corruption of reason, which leads to a very morally confusing experience. Now, here in this, if I can go back, one more to the intro slide here. This is the dark wood, our rendition of the dark wood, and this is where the poem starts. And this dark wood represents moral confusion, which all of us at some point are going through moral confusion where we're just, you know, we just don't know what's going on. We don't know what's right and wrong. We feel like we do, but we don't. And so Dante is trying to show us how to go through and isolate the different circles of hell. The interesting thing, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, we're going to go through probably two more. We're going to go through the first two circles, and then, gentlemen, we're gonna stop for any questions that might pop up. And please don't send me the questions personally if you're on Zoom, because I'm not looking at my messengers. I just look at them at the end. I don't look at them during. So the interesting thing about the circles of hell is very much like the book What Dreams May Come. It is a hell of your making. And it's not because it's like this mental construct that you put out there, which is very much true, which is very, what dreams may come. It's more of choices, right? Masonry believes in consequences. We believe in justice, and we believe that things that happen should have an end to them. They have a mortality to them. That's what justice is, right? It is the conclusion, it is the effect of an action. And justice can be positive, it doesn't have to be negative. So when we look at this, we are looking at how we make choices in our life that create our hell. And they're circles because circles mean what in symbology? Eternity. Each circle that we go through as humanity, are eternal. Eternal is different than immortal. Immortal is that it's linear time. There's a beginning and an end, right? So immortal means that you had a beginning and you have overcome the final death, and you experience no end, but you always had a beginning. You started somewhere. Eternity means there is no start and there is no end. It is cyclical. It just happens forever, right? So very, very different. All right, let's get into it. So we're gonna start up on upper hell because why not? Let's get to hell proper, right? And I apologize. I am not feeling the greatest. So my voice sound like a man. All right, limbo, right? So when we look at limbo, and let me close some of this so I can see my own slide. When we look at limbo, I'm going to put this in the context of reason. And then I'm going to put this in the context of failed initiations. So again, this isn't about you personally or me personally. It can be if you want. This is about humanity. We are trying to realize what happens and why humanity is feeling such a weight on its back. So limbo is reason without revelation. And I'm going to cheat and I want to go back. I want to go to the vestibule. Where is my vestibule? Yeah, that's an important one. Let me backtrack. Thank you for being patient. All right, let's get to the vestibule. Where are you, vestibule? Right there. So here is the picture of the vestibule. And each slide has some part or place in Dante's Inferno. The vestibule is interesting because this is like the anti-room to the Inferno. So this is the room place outside the landscape outside of the actual entrance into hell. And this is a really interesting one because this is where people go, according to Dante, who don't pick a side. They are morally ambivalent. They don't pick a side. And in Masonry, we always hope people pick the light. We always hope people pick the right moral choices. But those people in their life, they're like, look, I am not religious, I am not secular, I am not anything. There's nothing wrong with being agnostic, but when you are a perpetual agnostic, that means you're not doing your work. You gotta work through what you're like, look, I don't know if God exists, but I can't say he doesn't. That's fine for a while. That's a good waiting room, but eventually you gotta go see the doctor and see what the diagnosis is. So when we look at the vestibule in Dante's Inferno, this is the anteroom to hell. These are for people who don't pick a side. So when we look at society and we look at people who are just like, I have no skin in the game, that's crap, if I can be so blunt. That's crap because we're all part of humanity. We are all a part of the game. And we need to be mindful and we need to start doing what is right so that humanity can fulfill its destiny, that humanity can make the way. So I wanted to bring that up, even though it's not a part of this, hell proper. It is a very important place because some people are like, I don't care. Like I actually had a former student of mine tell me, yeah, I don't have any skin in the game. I don't have to play this. And it's like, no, you're crazy. You're a human being, of course, and you should, right? You should have some. Like, I care how the people are doing around the world. Like, I don't want people to be miserable and sad. And I understand that there's agency and they have the right to be miserable and sad, but, I wouldn't just be ambivalent to how they feel. All right, so we started out in the vestibule. You get, brought across the river, and you're taken to day one, which is limbo. This is reason without revelation. Masonry believes in the first cause. Again, we call it the great architect, but again, you can call it whatever you want. Reason without revelation is that you're looking at people who have lived their whole life without orientation. When I say orientation, I'm talking transcendent, right? So people who are ignorant, but they don't mean bad. They don't not purposely been like willfully blind. They're just ignorant and they don't have any orientation to something higher than themselves. The people, and this would be like nihilists who genuinely, and say neo-nihilists, people who believe in absolutely nothing. The neo-atheists who just is like there is nothing beyond us, we're it. This is where they would go. That they can live very good lives, but they don't have something to live for that's beyond this one life. When I say egocentric, I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm saying it as a matter of observation. When you think you're the only thing in this world, that this one life is all you have, and there's nothing beyond, there's nothing. It's a very inward perspective. And so limbo is going to be reason without revelation. Masonry believes in the first cause. We believe in the first principle, that there's something divine who has orchestrated this grand experience. And whether it is defined in one life or multiple, again, that's up to each person to discover and to understand. It's not, Masonry doesn't go into the details. Because if Masonry went into the details, we would never able find the truth, right? Because as something becomes more written down in more particulars, it becomes more concrete. And it loses, the pen, as beautiful and as powerful as it can be, can never fully capture the full essence of what it's writing. So we have to be careful in Masonry. You won't see, at least in universal Co-Masonry, we're very careful about inserting any type of interpretation on the specifics of a given thing. Individuals in humanity who, die without ever finding something transcendent to put their life in line with is a failed initiation orientation. They have failed to realize, again, it's all about reason. And this is the interesting thing about Virgil. Virgil will be in this gate, interestingly enough, because he was born pre-Jesus of Nazareth. So he is not going to, according to Dante, he's not going to have the revelation of the Christ figure. So he's not going to be able to make it. Now, again, in Masonry, that's not our interpretation. But you will see in Universal Co-Masonry that we will sit with all sorts of different types of belief systems. We study all the major religions of the world, not in pursuit of converting people to any particular one, but to understand. And I've said this before, but in Universal Co-Masonry, we can talk about politics and religion in general. We don't, again, talk about super specific current events. But if you really want to know an individual, ask them what they believe in religion and ask them what they believe in their philosophy of politics. You will really understand who they are. And again, that should be a tool not to crucify that person, no pun intended, but to really understand them. I try to ask that question as much as I can get away with it because some people aren't super happy about asking or being asked that question. But really, it's my way of trying to understand who they are. And when we look at people who undergo this gate of hell, again, this is on the outermost. And when you think of Dante's circles of hell, it goes down just as a descension, right? Because you're descending in premeditated collapse or corruption of reason. It's not that these people never had a chance to orient themselves. They just never did it, whatever the reason is. So if you're someone who's sitting there going, like, I don't know, well, go find out. Go find out your answer. Go figure out what it is that, what is it that you believe in? And, some people put humanism up there. Some people put an anthropomorphical being like Christianity or Judaism. They put something up there. They put all sorts of beautiful things and they align themselves. I've often talked about various folk tales and fairy tales and whatnot, where they have a star. They wish upon a star because they're pushing themselves up and out of themselves. They're trying to see what's beyond them. And so when we look at that first gate of hell, it's not that they didn't necessarily have a chance like Dante did with Virgil. It's more that they didn't choose to. But it wasn't malice. It was just they just didn't choose. Go find the answer. It's okay to be agnostic on a few things every once in a while, but take the time. If we only have this one life, you should figure that out. I'm going to go one more slide, and then, gentlemen, we're going to stop to see if there's any questions. Lust. This is always a good one. And I have to tell you, let me pull this out. There's so much on Dante. I have all sorts of notes. So that was a long one. When we look at the various circles of hell, Dante had an imagination on what their punishments would be. In the case of lust, they're in this forever cycle of just perpetual storm. Just, and it makes sense if the imagery is pretty clear. When you're overruled by your passions, again, I define passions as extreme emotion causing, great harm to you. Um, that when you're ruled by those, throws you to and fro, right? You never escape it unless you choose to escape it. So this is reason overruled by appetite. When we look at here, desire is going to be overtaken or is going to overtake your reason. Reason is going to collapse under desire. Desire should be something, it's not wrong to have desire, depending on what school of thought you believe. Um, but desire for the highest should be typically how that's oriented. Um, as I said, their punishment is to be forever swept, to and fro. This is a failed initiation in discipline. When we look around society and you have this post-truth era where how you feel is greater than the truth of the situation, that's wild. That's really wild to sit there and say that the way you feel is more important than the truth. Now, it doesn't minimize the fact that you feel a certain way, but it doesn't take over truth. That is discipline that brings forward truth and says, no, I know you feel this way. And I'm not even be condescending and say, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like I understand you feel this way. But the truth is this in the middle. And you need to control the way you feel. Doesn't mean you have to change the way you feel. You just need to control it. So when we look at our neighbors and our family members and our communities and we see people who are just overcome with lust for all sorts of different things. Lust, typically the one I think of is drama. When you get really dramatic people, a lot of people will say, I don't have time for drama in my life. And we typically don't if you have a purpose and you have things to do. And people who, you know, are consumed by drama they lust after it. They create it after a while. If they don't get enough of it, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong that they don't create it, that they go searching for it. And it's like the people who have learned the discipline to cut themselves off and say, look, I don't want to gossip about, Brother Benjamin, and I don't want to go and be mean to Brother Patrick. Like, I don't want to do these things. And you cut yourself off from that. It's a form of discipline. Masonry, especially in Universal Co-Masonry, we work very, very hard at being very disciplined. And it expresses itself through the body. We sit a certain way, very Egyptian-like. We sit a certain way. We dress a certain way in lodge. We speak our own formal language. We have a way in which we are disciplined. If you can tame the vessel, you can tame the soul, right? So when we look at living a virtuous life, sometimes you just can't come out and sometimes you should just come out and say, stop being dramatic or stop lusting after certain things and stop, pull yourself back in so they're not, spilling out into everybody. Sometimes we can't say that, even though it would be nice if we could. The way that I personally did this was when I would teach, and I taught secondary education, is I would try to bring back the passions of my students. And I learned this from Masonry, because Masonry is built of humans. And so we all, there's relationships and sometimes they rub and they should rub because everyone's different and that friction creates opportunity for growth for everyone involved in that situation. So with my students, I would pull them back and say, hey, I get you feel a certain way. Let's look at this. First off, calm down. Let's look at this. Why do you care what so-and-so is doing? That's none of your business. In Masonry, you take care of you and you focus on you. And then when you get in positions of leadership, you focus on the people that you're in charge of. 3 rule of lodge. And if you go outside of that, it becomes really messy really quick. Either you have a master who does everything and no one learns, and then they get burnt out, or you have wardens, which are their left and right hand man, who overstep their boundaries, and then you have 3 people that are the head of the lodge. You can't do that either. So lust is a very tricky place, but there's a lot of opportunity in Masonry to help us identify ways to fix that practically. So if you're in the works environment and you hear gossiping, because that's really easy to fall into, either one, don't just walk away, or 2, change the subject. Depends on what the mood you're in. And, now there's nothing like education that will bring out the complaints of people. Teachers like to complain. And so, changing the environment and saying, hey, yeah, I know you're really stressed about grading, but is there another way? Bring back that emotion so that it's controlled. Reason controls the appetite of emotion. So when someone falls into the second circle of hell in Dante, they have failed the initiation of discipline. And that is something, just because you fail it once doesn't mean you have to eternally fail it, like here in Dante's Inferno, but it's something that you should overcome. And Masonry strongly is very hierarchical, but has absolute freedom of mind. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to take a drink and I'm going to see if there are any questions that are coming from any of the platforms before we get to gauge 3, which is going to be gluttony. Gentlemen, are there any questions?
I have one.
Hit me. What do we
Um,
got?
so there's a question about before Dante entered hell, if you have an interpretation of the symbols of the leopard, the lion, and the she-wolf, if you want to get into that.
I purposely did not get into the three ruffians because there is a lot to go into the leopard, the she-wolf, and the lion. So I do have an interpretation, but if you want to send me an email, I'll be happy to talk to you about that on the side. I fear because it is such a deep symbology that if we start talking about the three ruffians that are blocking Dante's ascent up the mountain, which is right before you go into the hell, that we will not get through all the circles. So I apologize. I'm going to direct you to my email on that one, just so that we can stay on task. Any other questions?
Nothing on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.
All right. You guys are super happy with me talking. Well, let's keep going. All right. Gluttony. When we look at gluttony, this is going to be excess. This is where reason. So remember, reason is your faculty to observe, comprehend, and process cause and effect. The reason why he left me was because I was a jerk to him. Well, that would be reason, right? Um, Typically, humans are all reasonable people, even if they're acting irrational. They seem irrational to us because we don't understand why they are being that way, but they are reacting, whether it's because something happened in their childhood or they're, reacting from a situation that happened earlier in the day. Like everything has a reason. When we look at gluttony, we're looking at excess. So your reason, you're not using your faculty of reason by choice, that's part of it, because you're consuming too much. It's excess. You want more and more and more, right? This is a misuse of your vitality. That's extremely important. Every one of you can be the penultimate of yourself if you just make the choices. There's a book, and I've mentioned it before. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in the books here. I'm not really big into self-help books, but I happened, for whatever reason, many years ago, to pick up the book, um, The Power of Habit. I think it's Power of Habit, The Virtue of Habit, Power of Habit, something like that. And they talked about the keystone uh, habit. So they did a bunch of these researchers, is the big they. These researchers did a bunch of study on why successful people were so successful. My favorite one is the aluminum company. So they were looked at an aluminum company and it was failing, it was falling apart. And they got a new CEO and a bunch of people went into the CEO's, introductory meeting after he'd been hired to listen about his vision for the company. And of course, they had their expectations on like, how are we going to produce more aluminum? How are we going to sell it? And how are we going to distribute it? How are we going to get this across the, global trade? Um, and that is not the speech the CEO gave at the time. His speech was he was going to change the way that the employees communicated, which sounds really lackluster. But he changed the way that people communicated. So he made it that it was possible for everyone in the aluminum company to contact the highest, to contact him. They could email him at any time and say, hey, I noticed there was a safety issue, or I have a suggestion, or there's this issue that I have. And he opened up communication. And there was one part of the story that I loved where one of the investors like ran, like the investors were running to the phone afterwards. This is obviously before cell phones, to call their people and be like, you need to pull your money out because this is gonna go belly up. Like this guy is crazy. And as you can predict, the company did outstanding because what he found was a keystone habit. Instead of changing major things like, oh, I'm going to quit smoking, it was they changed the time they went to bed and then they got more sleep. Or in this case, it changed communications. The the employees felt seen and heard, and they wanted to work for the CEO, and they wanted to work harder, and they wanted, that they were part of a family, and instead of being part of a, like just a cog in a machine. And it changed. And when we look at excess, if we look at humanity and we look at everything around us, modernity loves excess. And we'll get to greed here in a second. Modernity loves excess. Everything is in excess. We have to pull back, not because someone told you to, but because you know it's the right thing to do. You have to shift and reorder things within you so that you can pull back. Do I love Starbucks? Oh, heck yeah. Do I need to go every day? No. Like that's excess. And it's not because I'm gonna end up murdering someone down the road. That doesn't correlate. It just means that my reason in living in a place of excess, I need to do things that are in measure. And in Masonry, you do your part. That is you do your part and you don't worry about whether or not, Brother Patrick is doing his part and Brother Benjamin. Now, there's an officer in the lodge who will make sure that they're doing their part. That's their job, is to make sure that the officers underneath them are, doing what they're supposed to. But if I'm just sitting in lodge and I'm not, I'm holding an office, like I don't need to worry about what other people are doing. I need to worry about myself and not try to overflow and misuse my vitality. When we live in excess, our reason is clouded, our senses become polluted, and we have to scrub them clean. It is excess without measure. And this is a failed initiation in reverence. You do not respect yourself if you are gluttonous. You are, your society, when we look at it, when people are trying to one up each other, even in stories, or all the way up to, how much food or stuff they have. And I know I'm tipping into greed a little bit, but you got to be careful. Reverence for your vitality, reverence for society, reverence for what's going on around you. It is excess without measure. And there is symbolism here with Cerberus the dog, which we won't, it's the three-headed dog, I should say, which we won't talk about because we just don't have the time. But when we look at gluttony, look around, start to use your reason, clean off your senses, which means, get good sleep. Stop eating like crap. If you have something that you're doing like smoking or drinking excessively, like stop. It's not good for you, and you know that. Um, that way, if you can get rid of that, you can have your senses available to you. So your reason is pure and unpolluted, and you can take in and you can have a reverence for the way things are and not succumb to excess. Do you need five cars? No, probably not. Um, do you need excess of other things? You need to measure it. Maybe you do. Maybe you do need five cars. I don't know. But you need to figure out what is appropriate so that when we look at society, we can understand what is excess and what is not. It's very, very important. Flowing into that, so an easy bridge over is greed. Excuse me. When we look at greed, there are two types of greedy people. Hoarders and prodigals. Hoarders are exactly about what you think they are. They're going to be focused on consuming and consuming and just taking in and taking in and taking in. When you look at prodigals, they're the ones that squander, right? They just, I have anything and everything and I just throw it. They don't have a reverence for resources. It's interesting with this because they kind of have a Sisyphus feel to them where they're pushing up boulders by their chest and they push it against each other, right? So the best way I heard the conflict described, it says this: the two groups push their weights in opposite directions around the circle. When they collide, they scream insults at each other. Why do you hoard? Why do you squander? Before turning back to repeat the process eternally. When we look at greed, if I were, let me take a step back. I wonder if I were to take a poll, which I'm not, but we can do it just rhetorically. If I were to ask you, what is the greatest ailment that is in humanity's way? What is causing humanity to just kind of feel like it's stopped in cement? I wonder how many of you would say greed. I think it would be a lot of you. I mean, we have so much more in this world, and we have so much excess in this world that we actually have people who are hoarders. Squanderers have been around for a while, but modernity has allowed many more people um, to have the ability to hold on. I was just talking to another brother the other day, and I was saying, that I am not a big fan of modern architecture, and I'm not talking about modern art style. I'm talking about the shopping malls that all look like tin cans. Not my favorite. They all have tin siding and stuff. And it's just like, where's the cathedrals? Where are the great, you know, beautiful churches and mosques of the day? Where'd those go? Instead, I'm stuck looking at Walmart, stamped out buildings. And I thought it was interesting because talking about society. I wonder if you look across the globe, and I know in the United States it's pretty heavy because we are a society of more. Um, if you look across the landscape, how many storage unit facilities do you see? They are like cropping up like weeds, and they have been there for a long time. Why? Why do we have storage units? That like what? We don't have enough space in our house for what we have? Like that's crazy. And I get, you store stuff here and there, but like we have car storages. We have this one thing in Denver where, and I'm sure this is all over the country, but they have cars that are stacked up in like this big pillar of just car storage. It's like that's crazy. It's not that everyone should be poor and should have nothing. It's not it at all. But there comes a point where like you have too much stuff. Like get rid of it. There's nothing more cleansing than just going through and getting rid of things. And you can take that psychologically, you can take that spiritually, you can take that materially, you can take it a lot of different ways. The other thing too is squandering. How many people in society, life sucks because they don't take care of what they have. This is, they're not living in harmony with where they're at. They're living outside of their means. The big financial crisis of 2007, 2008 in the United States was all about people not living inside their means and, other people being so greedy to sell them houses that they couldn't afford to begin with. So it's a failed initiation in harmony. Reason gets so fixated on certain things. I have to have that. I have to have that. And again, this doesn't just have to be material. Now, in modernity, especially as we move forward 500 years from its onset, you will see that people tend to be more materialistic because we live in a more materialistic time. If you looked back into the medieval era, you'd see that there was a greed of spirituality where people would just not live in harmony with the divine and they would hoard all of their possessions spiritually and not share it with people, or they would squander. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can take it. So when we're trying to diagnose problems within our community, I think people can diagnose this pretty easily, but how do you fix it? Well, the answer to all of these fixes is an easy one is you got to first fix it, be the example within yourself. Go home tonight if you're not there already. Go home and look around you and see how can you live in harmony and understand how that looks both spiritually, mentally, physically. And by living that way, maybe you're in a family, that you have kids or grandparents, whatever, living with you, aunt and uncles, you can help them and they can help other people. We don't know the reach of our this reach of our ability to impact people. When we look at society, how can we help humanity not dig themselves into greed? Well, that's a hard one because people, they don't want to be without, and people without don't want to be without. So it's very easy to hoard and hold on to things. Um, And not that I'm here to give financial advice, I won't do that at all. But when you look at it, it's the better question isn't like how do I not be greedy? How do I help society not be greedy? Is how do I help them live in harmony? And I often think of Pythagoras in the music of the spheres. And we gotta tune our notes. They're off tune, they're not quite in the right orchestral layout. Someone's playing the wrong instrument at the wrong time. We need to help identify where there's greed. And I know this is probably the easiest of all of them, but Sisyphus, is constantly pushing that boulder up a hill and is being pecked out. What is it? It's not the Valkyries. That's not it. What did they get pecked out?
Harpies.
Harpies. I was like, Valkyries is totally the wrong mythology. It's the harpies. Thank you. And they're getting pecked out. He's getting pecked out. He's getting pecked out. And when we look at this, we look at people in our communities that are constantly moving this boulder, and we need to find a way not to remove the boulder for them because that doesn't help, but to help them understand that they're moving the boulder themselves. Again, so we have to find a way to uncorrupt the reason of fixation. Um, an interesting story. We have a friend, my husband and I, that we've known since high school, and his father, I should say his aunt, his father's sister, was murdered when she was 16 years old. It's actually a very famous case back in the 80s, 70s, 80s here in Colorado. And she was murdered. She was a 16-year-old cheerleader. And it was my husband and I are friends, his dad's sister. And his dad became so obsessed. They never did find, unfortunately to this day, who murdered his sister, but he was so obsessed in finding who she was, like he just became fixated and he never did. And eventually he turned his fixation to alcohol and he became an alcoholic. And by the time we met him, he's still around, the sweetest man you'll find. He changed his fixation. He realized that because of what happened to his sister when he was a kid, he was never going to be able to get rid of that fixation, but he would be able to change its direction. So he went from, obsessively trying to find the murderer to obsessively drinking to cope with it to becoming an obsessive reader. And I'm not joking. I think that they last clocked him at 100 books a week because he's retired. And so he would just read incessantly because he knew he couldn't overcome that fixation, but he directed it to something greater, which was to his own knowledge. I remember he gave me this big chemical book, which is it's a reference manual for it's timestamped, so it's like what the different chemicals are and the drugs that come from it and whatnot. When I say drugs, I'm talking pharmaceutical. And he gave it to me. He's like, I already read it. It's like 2,000 pages, and it was wild. And he gave it. I was like, I'll take it. Did I read it? No. But the point of the story is that we can change it. If you see society where someone is just constantly pushing something over and over, redirect them, help them find purpose. The reason why AA is so successful, from what I understand, is because it focuses on something higher than the self, higher than the problem, and that allows people to get out of themselves. People are happiest when they're not living inside themselves all the time. When you're constantly ruminating over you all the time, it gets depressing and people get sad and they start to obsess about themselves. So the more you can help them direct that fixation outward, the better. All right. The fifth gate. We are halfway through. This is excellent. Is wrath, reason consumed by passion. And wrath is divided into two different categories. Excuse me. So the wrathful are going to be um, excuse me, are going to be those who have active anger, right? They're outbursts. They are those who suffer, just lash out at everyone. So we're seeing reason is going to be devoured by passion. It's a different type of way of being devoured, right? So you have lust, which is going to be overruled by passion or the appetite. Here, this is the convolution of reason through it's almost violent. It's not quite violent, but it can be. It's interesting because here you can look at it. They are going to live in naked and always with an angry look, and they're trapped on the surface of a muddy marsh. And marshes are important because they're sluggish. They suck you down, so you can never get out. And they're constantly getting pissed because they can't get out, and they're constantly being mad. And here you see a rendition. I believe this is William Blake. If not, it's Gustave Doré, one of the two. I want to say it's Gustave. Um, I love those two artists. They do. If you ever want to look at the most beautiful literature, or excuse me, the most beautiful art interpretation of Dante's Inferno, is William Blake and Gustave Doré, in my humble opinion. Um, so they're stuck and they're constantly trying to get out and they're pulling on and they're angry all the time and they're very vengeful. And then you have the sullen. Sullen are easier to be around in real life, right? Because they just kind of sit in the corner and just are kind of pissed off by themselves. But when we look at the sullen here, they're buried beneath the stinking slime, like completely. And the only reason why Dante knows they're there is because there's a very mournful song that they can't you can't hear the words, but they're gurgling it out of their throat, and it's causing bubbles to come up out of the surface. It's disgusting. And when we look at people who are consumed by wrath, I don't think many people would see the sullen as wrathful, but they are. Their entire life is consumed of just being mad at people and doing nothing about it, by the way, because they just sit, in this case, under the stinking slime, which is their skin. It's who they are. They just sit underneath their skin and they're just mad at everybody and they're gurgling, so you kind of know they're mad. And they're upset, but they never address it. When we look at this, we're looking at the soul refusing accountability. People who are angry are always kind of blaming other people. It's this person's fault. It's that person's fault. In society, we got to stop blaming the other groups. We got to stop. We got to stop doing it. And it has to take one side doing it because if you're going to wait for the other side, the other side never will, right? So we have to find a way to stop the wrath. And I probably would say, at least in my observations, and I'm sure it was a little different, that wrath is probably the one we see the most right now, at least in the United States. I'm not quite sure in other areas. Um, but when we look at this, wrath is something that's very common in society, especially now, where people have zero courage because they just put their anger out on their social medias and they blast people across the board. But ask yourself before you post it, would I say this to the person's face? If the answer is not, yes, don't post it. I never post anything negative because it's like it's crazy. It's once it's out there, your emotion's over, and then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have fired that off. So when we look at our society and we look at the wrath, I think this is where we can play the biggest part. First off, by not perpetuating the anger and the smuck and the stinking slime, which easily can be social media. It's also talking people down from it and saying, not chastising, because what does that do? I tell my husband this all the time. Telling someone to chill out never made anyone chill out, by the way. So you just looking at someone being like, yeah, you really need to calm down is not it. Sometimes they just need to be heard and you just listen. Sometimes you need to ask questions because no one's ever asked them, like, do you really think that side that you're really mad at is that they think they're wrong? Or have you ever been to what they believe in, whether it's politically, religiously, whatever? And like, have you ever, get a little bit of empathy? And I'm not saying you have to believe in what they believe in and you don't have to convert. No one's saying that, but like the greatest cure to wrath is empathy. And to all of these is empathy. Because when you look at people who are angry, they are not accountable. And what probably stokes the fire more than anything is they know they're not accountable and they get mad at it every time they try to blame someone and then they realize if they're thinking human being, they realize, here I go again. I'm just blaming so and so when it's really my fault. We have to find accountability. One of the great ways I've seen a worldview flip on its head is instead of saying, look at what the world did to me. And this is for you millennials out there. I love you. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm kind of like I can be either one. I can even be a baby boomer if you want. Zoomer's a little too young for me, but like the world promised you that it'd be its oyster, and it's not. So, like, get over it. It's not. Go do something about it. Don't sit there and complain that you were fed this, bag of goods and it didn't come true. Like, sorry. We shouldn't have to do World War I and World War II. Like, life could be way worse. Have accountability. You're right. I did not get the childhood I wanted. I did not get the promises I was asked, or rather told to have. Okay. And move on, have accountability, move forward. Say, okay, well, I'm in charge of my life. And if I want that house, or if I want that job, or if I want that family, or whatever it is you want, go do it. And if you fail, do it again. And you keep doing it over and over, and you'll never, ever be mad. You might be mad at yourself because you did something stupid along the way, but it's about accountability. And when we look at our society, I can hit up the Gen Xers. We just want everyone to be happy. Like, can we all just get along? No, they're not. So find a way to fix it. Find a way to be a part of the solution. It's all about accountability. Everyone has a part to play in humanity. Every single person, even the person who is the most unseen person, which unfortunately, working with international inquiries, I see a lot of people who don't think anyone's listening to them. And they just want to belong because they just want to be seen. Like, they matter too. We're all here for a reason. And if we can all figure out what that reason is, it's not going to be the same. There's three people in this room. There's going to be three different reasons why we're here. Just like on this call, there's going to be way more, reasons of why you're here. We've got to have accountability to help us. And Masonry helps us with accountability. When I have made mistakes along the way, I have had brothers who are much wiser than I am come to me and say, hey, I noticed that this happened. And they were the most loving. I've never had a brother come at me sideways and just say, hey, this happened and we need to take care of it. And, I want to push the blame off and, blame my cat. I don't even have a cat, but blame my cat and, make it someone else's fault. But ultimately, Masonry holds you accountable. It is a meritocracy. If you're not advancing in Masonry, it's because you're choosing not to advance in Masonry. No one's going to push you into the second degree or the third degree. No one's going to push you to initiate. No one's going to do any of that. It's going to be accountable. You have to. If you're mad at the world, if you're mad at the, situation, that's on you. You got to fix it. You got to move forward. Masonry makes you a co-author in your own salvation, right? It doesn't just outsource it and say, well, this one, idea is going to save you. And no, if you're gonna be saved, it's because you worked hard for it and you made yourself worthy of being a part of those who are choose to be called. All right, checking my time here. Got to speed up just a little bit to make sure we're almost there. So heresy. you know, heresy is always good. Now, I have to say, when we look at Dante's Inferno, right? So you have the dark woods, you have the mountain. On the other side of the mountain, not other side, but like around, is hell, right? You have the three ruffians, as I call them. Dante doesn't call them that. You have the three animals that block the ascent up, which means reason cannot get you to the top. Dang it, right? Reason cannot get to the top. So you go down into hell. You have the anti-room to hell. You have to take a river to get into hell. You finally get into upper hell. By the time you go from the fifth circle to the sixth circle, you are passing in through the city of Dis. And this is going to take you into the lower gates of hell. So six through nine are the lower gates of hell. And I say gates, I mean circle, right? It's lower circles of hell. And you have to go through a very heavily armed, very tied up gate to get through. And these gates are guarded by the fallen angels. And you can surmise what that is. You can figure out what you think that is. Dante obviously has his very Christian perspective on what a fallen angel would look like. But the fallen angels are the ones that guard it. And Dante relies on Virgil to get him through it, but Virgil reason can't get him through the fallen angels, and it's an outside entity of divine descent that allows him through into the city of Dis, into the lower gates of hell. So I want to kind of give you that process of how this is looking. So heresy. Now remember, as we descend into this corrupted circles of reason, these are more and more calculated. So it's getting worse and worse. Like when you're in limbo and you don't choose a side, I mean, that's pretty bad. You're sitting in the first circle of hell. But I mean, it's not the ninth circle with hanging out with Judas the Iscariot, and that's good, right? So these get more and more calculated. That's the interesting thing is, again, when we say hell is of your making, a lot of people make that psychological. It's what you think it is, which is not wrong, but it's also practical. Like if you are a person that, you do not, you're so dogmatized that someone else cannot have an opinion. You can be an ideologue and not, allow other people to have an opinion. That's heresy. That is such a hardened sense of security that's not even true. And it's not even real. These are calculated. So remember that as we keep going down into the circles of hell. Interesting thing I really sounds weird. I really like about this circle of hell. Can you say that in a sentence? Is that morally acceptable? What? Anyway, so what I really like about this particular experience with heresy is this is a rejection of spiritual truths. Now, I know there are people out there who think there's nothing beyond the physical. I challenge that, and I would daily challenge that. Um, because there is more. What, like, if we were all the same, then we'd be all the same. Like, what makes you and you and me? Just pure nurture? That our environment made that? Well, that would mean that there's something that it has to impress upon. Like, that's crazy to me. Masonry asserts that there is something beyond, very, very much beyond the physical. But interestingly enough, Dante says it's not just those who reject spiritual truths, it's the rejection of the immortality of the soul. One of the beliefs that and landmarks that we have in Masonry and in universal, and I have to be very specific, in universal Co-Masonry here, is the permanence of the soul. Meaning that once you die, that the soul continues on. It can be the transfiguration of souls, it can be reincarnation, it can be some interpretation of that. But the soul doesn't die with the body. And for Dante, he sees this as a very egregious error. I mean, we're in, and when we're looking at hell proper, we're going straight into the lower gates. Like we had a lot of effort to get here. And the interesting thing about these is that these individuals are punished by having sepulchres that they are buried in. And they are engulfed in intense flame. And the crazy thing is, according to Dante, is when the great judgment comes, whatever that does, they are sealed forever in these tombs, and that is their permanent final death. Like I said, Dante was really imaginative about the destruction of people. Um, but when we look at this is a rejection of spiritual truths. When we look at society, again, most people, when I say, at least in the United States, they're becoming less and less religious. I don't know if that's necessarily equates to less and less spiritual, although I think it can run parallel. When we stop looking up, when we stop looking out, and all we do is focus on ourselves inwardly, you fail to see the great synchronicities of the universe. And if we stop seeing, eventually we'll stop seeing altogether. We'll be like these individuals who there's souls that are entombed forever in these fiery sepulchres, uh, forever. That's a crazy thing for me. Like, be curious. Who was I talking to? I was talking to another brother just the other day, actually. I think it was just last week. We were talking about it. And we were talking about people being curious. And she and I are very curious individuals, and we were talking about someone she knew that wasn't. And just, trying to put myself in that idea of like being curious. In our society, it's not that we have to go preach the good word and everyone has to believe in the immortality of the soul. It's more of getting them to understand that their soul is worth being immortal, that they are worth the immortality that the soul can have, that they have a purpose. Nihilism has snuck into the foundations and the buttresses of society and is starting to rip, not slowly, quite quickly, purpose out of people. Take away people's purpose and they'll die fast. Well, I mean, look at people who are put in old homes, old folks' homes without any care. They have no purpose and they die quickly. And we don't want that. We want humanity to be robust. We want it to be in its youth. We want it to be vibrant. And so when we look at this particular gate, it is a failed initiation and openness. Be open to the other sides. And I say sides because it's not dichotomous. It's not just one against the other. Be open. Get people to talk. One of the things we do in MPS, we talk all the time on so many different topics, and we hear people who are like, "I think that's great," and I think that, another person's like, "I think that's evil." It's okay because we are not our opinions. We are not mortally wounded when someone says, "I don't agree with you," even though it feels that way. It's not. We have to be open. We have to allow ourselves to hear something different, or we're no better than the people in history that we accuse of, like, the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades. That's a great one people like to bring up about religious wars. Well, we're in our own war, and we don't have to be. We can, if we open ourselves up to the other idea, not necessarily for the hope of changing ourselves, or in others, but to have, as a very dear brother of ours says, to have collaborative dialogue, right? To have people joining in and saying, well, what about this? What about that? I don't agree, but why not? And having it done in the spirit of fraternity. And when I say fraternity, I mean for all people of the human race, because we're all of one brotherhood. So having this openness, having conversations, that's why I love asking people, like, why do you believe that? Again, not to change their mind, but to understand them. Why do you believe that? Oh, well, what about this? And how does that work? And having that openness, I might walk away being like, that person was on point. I agree with what that person was saying. And I did it before. Or I might walk away and be like, nope, I do not, but I understand them better. And I know that when I go to speak to them the next time, I'm not going to speak my language because they don't speak my language. They speak their own language. I can speak what they're talking about. Masonry is about, in one way, of learning. What is there, 7.7 billion people today?
8 billion now.
Oh, people are fertile. 8 billion. We have 8 billion people on the globe. There are 8 billion languages to learn. Like when I sit down and you can ask the brothers here when we have lunch or dinner together, like there's all these different languages going and people are trying to share their ideas and we're trying to understand and be understood and going back and forth. We can create that in our communities. And at first it's painful because some people just shut down and I don't want to talk about it. And so like, well, tell me a little bit. Like, well, at least tell me about when you were a kid. What were you raised with? And what do your parents think? Like you can work on it and eventually, you can come out with the big questions that are very existential and they'll respond. But this is humanity is failing in this openness. Just because you're open to hearing someone's ideas does not mean you accept them as truth. That's like the weirdest equivocation I've seen in the last 10 years is like, well, if I accept what someone is saying, then I must say they're being true. No, you just heard what they said and have a way to understand that Masonry puts you in different degrees, puts you in various offices, like, if you're the head of the lodge or maybe you're at the beginning of the offices, there's an alignment of officers to learn the different language of those offices so that when someone's coming through that and you're more at the top of the officers list, you can help them and speak that language. Brother Benjamin and Brother Patrick here speak very different languages when they're working with people in different capacities. And when we're in the outside world, as we call it, which I think is dumb because we live in the real world, but when we're outside of Masonry and outside of Masonic conversations, we translate that into meeting people where they're at, understanding, oh, this person really is more of a mystical person. So if I start throwing, Humean ideas and empirical, like they're gonna shut off. And if they're this person over here who's extremely again, very empirical and wants to think this, I'm not gonna be talking about occult woo-woo stuff to them because that's not gonna grok with them. We have to be open, and we can do this by airing out our houses, our homes, our friends, our relationships, being honest. This is something that Masonry allows us to do, is to speak and be heard as well as to hear other people. Told you would get to violence. Excuse me, the seventh gate of hell is violence, and this one is divided into two different types, or excuse me, three different types of violence. Um, I'll just put them here for you. You have violence against others, violence against the self, and violence against things that are transcendent, like the great architect, nature, and art, which I'm pretty sure Plato would not agree with that art part, but Plato could be wrong. He doesn't always have to be right. So when we look at this, this is violence. This is people who have chosen to have their will govern their reason. Like might makes right. Just because you're stronger doesn't mean you need to be a bully. Doesn't mean that you need to beat up on people. Right? So murderers and tyrants. Masonry believes in the sanctity of life. Interpret that any way you want, and every brother does. We believe in the sanctity of life, the reverence for all. So, the brutality against one person is a brutality against me. Like I share in the suffering of others, right? That's co-passion, compassion. Is the shared joint understanding of someone's pain. So the first ring is going to be violence against others. And that's what this image is here, where you have these individuals who are stuck in this river of boiling blood and they're being shot at by centaurs. So they're shooting at them so they can't climb up the bank. Like I said, Dante really knows how to bring the imagery out on punishment, right? I almost put up the second ring, but I mean, I've known people in my life that have committed suicide. I don't know, it's such the way that Gustave Doré does it. He shows the punishment for people who do suicide is that they become thorny bushes that are being pecked at. Not bushes, excuse me, trees. Um, that they get pecked at for eternity. And to me, this is one of the saddest things is violence against the self. Because you can have violence against you by others and still know your self-worth. But when you lose your self-worth, when the downtrodden are so downtrodden, they don't realize that they're important and they're willing to take their own life. Like that's the saddest. And that's why I didn't put it up because I was like, oh man, that's just so, so sad. And very, very personal for a lot of people. Not that violence against, someone violence against you isn't it? That's not personal. It is. It's just a different type. The interesting thing here about the third ring is the violence against the great architect, nature, and art. Um, this one's interesting because, a lot of people don't think it's violence. And when we look at the sacred, Masonry believes in the sacred, right? That which is holiest. And when we trample it beneath our feet, which means we know what we're doing and we're purposely subverting our reason, this is not right, and I'm not going to do this, and I put it underneath my boot and I trample on it, then that trampling is going to be blasphemy. It's taking advantage of others when there's no need. This is filled in initiation and justice. When we look around us in our society, there's lots of violence of all different types. We can stand up to it in our own ways, and we can be examples to how this can be stopped. Justice is important. There's last time I looked, it was like 181 countries, and there's 181 interpretations of what a justice system looks like. If you ever want to read some good books on justice, let me know. I have it's kind of rabbit hole I have fallen into is what is the best justice in the world. But they're all man laws. They're man-made, right? They're not natural laws. So we have to use reason and say, okay, well, if the law told me to do violence against another, is that something I should do? No, we shouldn't. We should flip it on its head, and we should choose to refrain from that. I'm gonna move quick because we're almost done. We have the second to last gate, which is fraud. I'm not going to go into a deep one on this one because I really want to get to that ninth circle. I picked the fourth ditch because this has 10 ditches, and I put the ditches below. They're called bolgia in Italian, bolgia for ditch. There's 10 of them, and they are within themselves. So again, Dante's hell is very elaborate. And when we look at this, The reason why I picked the fourth one is because their heads are on backwards and they walk in reverse because these are going to be the sorcerers and the soothsayers, people who are predicting the future. They're always doomed to look back behind them and never see what's in front of them. And I thought that was very imaginative. He has 10 different descriptions of each of the Boljas, if you want to look at it. When we look at fraud in society, fraud can be using reason. I'm smarter than you, so I know how to trick you to take what's yours and make it my own. Again, the 2007 financial crisis would be an example of that in the United States, and there's lots of examples across the world. But when we are purposely taking advantage of other people, we lack integrity. Masonry is very, very big on integrity. Very big. So when we look at integrity, it's always being true to our word. If we say we're going to do something, we do something. If someone's going to do something that's dishonest, we don't let them, if it's something that is grand, I wouldn't keep the secret of a brother who's doing something awful like fraud. I would go to my peers and be like, hey, just so you know, this brother, not that I've ever seen this, but this brother is doing fraud against another. But we instill integrity within ourselves. You cannot be the custodian of humanity and its progress if you don't have integrity. You need to define what integrity is for you. And this circle is called the Melboj, which is means out of it's ditches out of that which is bad, right? And there are 10 of these. Now, I have to say, if I can be an art critic, which I can't because I'm not I'm not versed in art as much as I'd like to be. I am not a big fan of this rendition because it looks like Satan's pouting. The rendition, I could not find it for the life of me, but there's a rendition, and I don't know who does it, but it's where Satan is sitting frozen in ice, and it's from the shoulders up, and he's three-faced, which you can kind of see if I move my cursor here. There's a second face here, and there's one on that back side. And here you have Dante and Virgil looking down. This is frozen, 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 and this is going to be um the landscape is ice. It's four different regions of ice, and it's called the cosmology, right? This is what's called the icy landscape. And you have Satan at the middle, and he's frozen with these three faces, and he's crying. He's frozen in his tears. The moment I read that in Dante's Inferno, like it moved me. Like when we think of hell, it is fiery. It's rivers of blood, it's dogs tearing people apart, harpies ripping at your heart, It's all that very violent and fiery. For him, the very bottom of hell was cold because it is the most calculated form of corrupt reason you can have. And this is where you obliterate all of your reason. And Satan is sitting in the middle. And in Masonry, we don't have an adversary like Satan. We have adversaries, but they tend to be a little bit more, well, I should say a little less grand, like ignorance. I mean, that's pretty grand, but it's not as like adversarial as people envision Satan. Like ignorance and fanaticism and ambition, which I would say are the three faces of Satan. And Satan is crying and frozen in his tears because he has lost all chance of change. He cannot change. And in each mouth, he is chewing on the greatest traitors of all time. And according to Dante, Judas the Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius. And Brutus and Cassius are Brutus is the one that stabbed Julius Caesar in the back, and Cassius is the one that helped Roman senator who helped manage all of the treachery and the betrayal of Julius Caesar. And the reason why we think he chose these two people, obviously Judas Iscariot speaks for himself as the betrayer of the Christ figure. He was Christian, that makes sense. Brutus, because he was the friend of the rightful king, or the rightful ruler, emperor, not king. And Cassius, because again, he betrayed the rightful emperor of Dante, considered to be the divine ruler on earth. And this is the absolute spiritual death that society has, is treachery. This is a failed initiation of conscience. When people are doing things that are so terrible to each other that there's no hope. Like, I don't think treachery, I mean, I think treachery exists and we've seen it in small doses, but it is so, according to Dante, so deep and calculated and so intense that it is the last of this nine circles of hell. And this is where no Mason wants to be. This is where you're so frozen, your soul is so frozen in ignorance. The society is so frozen in their ignorance that they annihilate themselves. They lack all conscience. Masonry is constantly trying to work its way and society its way out of this ditch. And the reason that Dante, it wasn't called the Divine Comedy, it was just called the comedy, which back in the day, comedy meant starts out as a tragedy and ends in good ending, right? And a tragedy is the opposite. It starts out in a tragedy and ends in a tragedy. But this is a comedy, and it was added divine because it was so cosmic that it ultimately is the journey of humanity. That there are ways to avoid this. We don't have to be in these circles if we make sure our reason is something that allows us to make the right choices. And Masonry, again, focuses on reason, but also on faith. Remember, faith can be defined as a confidence in a thing, confidence that there is something better than what we have. And I'm going to end with this last, 1 minute over. I'm going to end with this last slide, which is a picture of Paradiso, Paradiso, where if you can see the symbol, it's a circumpunct. And it's the divine in the middle, and it's a host of heaven all around it. And that's not necessarily Virgil, that is going to be Beatrice. Because Virgil can only get him halfway through Purgatorio. Because reason can only take you so far. And Beatrice was a heavenly figure, someone who was sent by the Christ figure, if you will, in Dante's Inferno, to help guide Dante out of the depths of hell. The question is, how do we get Virgil and Beatrice to work in society so that it can be all the perspectives? I think of that as the angels that are circling the divine logos, the great architect, whatever you want to call that center, illuminating sun, the spiritual sun. How that's all of humanity, not just the 8 billion that exists, but all of them. That's every person wrapping around that center point that allows us to all exist in great ecstasy of whatever it is that humanity was born and created to do in its long life, I hope. So Masonry works to the glory of the great architect and to the perfecting of humanity. And it is with the eye of the transcendent, that point within all of this, that we work towards the perfecting of humanity, as every person matters. And as we identify through our reason all the different places that our society sits in the various circles of hell and the subcircles of hell, we can get out of it. We just have to be active. We can't be in limbo. We can't just sit and say, it's not my problem, because it is, one way or the other. So I hope you appreciate my reversal of what we were going to present today. I really felt like this is where we needed to go as a literary approach to societal needs. Everyone matters. Masonry is there to help the individual excavate what's inside of them so that they can be the best laborer of society that they can to help create philosopher kings, not only on the cosmic level, but also on the micro level in our homes, in our workplaces, wherever we are. So I hope you will join us next month. We will come back. Um, I don't know what topic we'll present, but I'm sure it'll be what it needs to be. And I want to thank Brother Patrick Alessandra and Brother Benjamin Hartle for being here and moderating those platforms, and to each one of you for spending your afternoon, evening, and night with us, maybe even morning. And for those who are in the Philippines, Brother Patrick and I will be out there at the end of the month. We're looking forward to seeing you and being a part of that egregore out there. So for the rest of you, have a wonderful month, and we will see you in March. Take care.